Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere a little grim. But don't worry, you're already doomed. You're standing on a creaking Roman dock as dawn stretches its pale fingers across the bay. And you can almost pretend this is a vacation. Almost. A sour wind drags the smell of fish guts and mildew over the wooden planks, and the colossal hull of the cargo ship looms above you like some indifferent god of splinters and regret. The waves slap against its sides, and every impact sounds like a warning. You squint up at the deck, where men are already shouting and shoving sacks of grain the size of large children. The entire vessel tilts slightly with every movement, as if it's trying to shrug you off before you've even boarded. In about 5 minutes, you'll be up there, trying not to vomit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I like to imagine all of you out there, keeping me company in this strange little experiment. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your foot connects with the first rung of the rope ladder, slick with something that might be fish slime or might be something worse. As you climb, you're aware of the way the hull shifts under your weight, the timbers groaning like an arthritic spine. By the time you drag yourself over the railing, your arms are trembling and your palms are raw. No one claps. No one even notices. A sailor with sunburned eyelids and a face like boiled leather lurches past you, muttering something about the port fees. You pretend you didn't hear it. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so are your neighbors if they ever tried this voyage. You take a moment to look round, hoping for a sign this was all a mistake, that you could simply step back down to the dock. But the gangplank is already being hauled up with deliberate slowness. Every creak announcing your sentence. The deck is cluttered with crates and free-sealed with wax. Heaps of rope that look older than most empires. And everywhere you turn, there's a smear of something pitch, or grease, or the last meal of some unfortunate sailor. You already feel a little queasy. But you reassure yourself that it's just nerves. It's not dot at the prow. A carved figurehead glares down at you with empty eyes, as though even the ornament is judging your choices. The ship is the Novice Aurelia, a Roman bulk cargo vessel designed to haul grain across the Mediterranean. Historians still argue whether these ships were triumphs of engineering or just floating coffins with sails. As you watch a line of workers maneuver a barrel the size of your dreams onto the deck, you suspect the latter. Someone shoves a bundle into your hands, a rolled mat, scratchy as an old doormat, which you're expected to sleep on. You clutch it against your chest like it might save you, but already you can feel the damp seeping through the fabric. A short man with a half-missing ear gestures at a patch of deck near the rail. You will be staying there, apparently, unless you'd prefer to share a storage bin with the ship's population of extremely determined rats. You set the mat down and look round for anything resembling personal space. There isn't any. A trio of men with shaved heads are arguing over whose turn it is to check the bilge. The word bilge alone makes your stomach do an unsettling little pirouette. You sit on your mat anyway, tucking your knees up as though you can protect your dignity. You can't. Remember that feeling of regret you had while climbing aboard? It's still there, stronger now, amplified by the knowledge that you haven't even left port yet, and already you're rethinking every decision that led you here. The ship creaks again, louder this time, as if it's trying to warn you in a language older than Latin. You wonder if the captain, who you haven't seen yet, has any faith in this expedition. You suspect he doesn't. Your eye catches a sliver of movement under a top. A rat scurries across the deck, bold as a senator on payday, vanishing behind a crate. You make a mental note to sleep with your bundle clutched to your chest. Not that it'll help when the real misery begins. A seagull lands on the railing beside you, eyeing you with cold curiosity. It cocks its head, lets out a noise that sounds suspiciously like laughter, and flutters away. You watch it disappear into the sky and feel a pang of envy. The gull gets to leave whenever it wants. You, on the other hand, are officially cargo. A bell clangs somewhere near the stern, and the deck erupts into motion. Sailors grab ropes, shout commands you can't understand, and begin the slow, ponderous ritual of preparing to depart. You stand up, though you're not sure why. There's nowhere to go and nothing you can do except be in the way. A large man with a nose that has been broken at least twice scowls in your direction, then points at your feet. You look down too. See you're standing on a coil of rope as thick as your arm. You step aside and mumble an apology. The man doesn't acknowledge you. The rope slides away like a living thing, disappearing into the bowels of the ship dock. The wind picks up, riffling the edges of the tarps. A low groan echoes through the hole, and the deck seems to tilt under your boots. You swallow hard. You'd like to believe this is just an adjustment period, that soon you'll find your sea legs and this will all feel less alien. But deep down, you know better. This is the first hour of a journey that will test every shred of resolve you've ever pretended to possess. A sailor wanders by carrying an amphora with a patchwork of wax repairs. He sees your expression and grins with the weary satisfaction of someone who has seen hundreds of fresh victims board the ship, all with the same hopeful look that will dissolve in about 12 hours. He jerks his thumb toward the stern, where the last of the dock workers are stepping away from the hole. The cargo is loaded. The ropes are cast off. The ship is finally ready to abandon the relative safety of Port Dot as the deck lurches under your feet and the smell of the open sea rises up to meet you. You press one hand against the railing and close your eyes. Maybe, just maybe, if you pretend hard enough, you'll wake up in your own bed, with clean sheets and a pillow that doesn't smell like pickled fish. But when you open your eyes, the horizon is already creeping sideways, and the dock is receding behind you. You are aboard the Roman cargo ship, and you are not going home anytime soon. You are trying very hard not to breathe through your nose, but the ship has other plans. The moment you lean against the railing to steady yourself, a gust of wind barrels across the deck and shoves the full aroma of this floating disaster straight into your sinuses. It is an odor that feels almost solid, some grim medley of bilge, water, stale olive oil, the collective sweat of every sailor who's ever existed, and a definite undertone of something you'd rather not identify. You gag a little, but there's nowhere to escape. Even your damp mat radiates a sour warmth that clings to your clothes. Your stomach flips in warning as you shuffle sideways, searching for any spot where the air might be less offensive. But the ship is already sliding past the breakwater, where the harbor's filth has accumulated for centuries. Historians still argue whether Roman ports were marvels of efficient design or sprawling sewers with docks attached. You suspect the latter, as another wave slaps the hull and unleashes a fresh exhalation of rot. Someone once told you that the Romans called this vessel an ovis honoraria, a bulk freighter that could carry thousands of amphorae stuffed with grain, wool, and the occasional surprise cargo like you. The irony is that they thought of this as progress, a triumph of imperial logistics. You cling to the railing and try to picture the Senate congratulating itself while you try not to throw up. It's a comforting image in a bleak sort of way. A sailor with a sun-peeled scalp slams a barrel down inches from your toes, muttering that it needs to be wedged before the swell gets any worse. You nod as though you have any idea what that means, and he squints at you like he's not sure if you're alive or just ballast, as he disappears into the tangle of ropes and crates. You catch a glimpse of the ship's name etched in the timbers, Near the bow, the letters are faded, but you can still read them. Fortuna's Smile. You think that's probably the most sarcastic name anyone could have picked. Your eyes water as you crouch to adjust the mat, wishing it would somehow absorb the smell. It doesn't. Instead, you notice a dark line trailing from under a nearby amphora, glistening in the weak daylight. You tell yourself it's just seawater. You don't believe it. Overhead, the rigging creaks like a dying chorus. A gull circles. Once, thinking better of it, you envy its freedom again. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is your sense of optimism. Remember when you were still on the dock and you thought the smell couldn't be that bad? It's still there, only now it has settled into your hair, your tunic, and probably your soul. You try to inhale shallowly, but the ship lurches and a wave of nausea rolls up from your stomach. You swallow it back with a grim determination you didn't know you possessed. You've survived worse, probably. As the horizon tips gently back and forth, you attempt to distract yourself by studying the crew. They move with the resigned efficiency of men who spent years hulling cargo and pretending they don't. Do you notice the rats? You count at least. 4 different tattoos on one sailor's arm, symbols you can't identify, and probably wouldn't want to. Another man with a thick grey beard is scraping barnacles from the rail with a curved knife. The scraping sounds like your last nerve being pared away. The first mate emerges from behind the mainmast, his face set in a permanent frown. He bellows something about stowing the last of the cargo, and several men spring into action. Try to look useful by shifting your mat a few inches. No one pays you any mind. You suppose you should be grateful they aren't ordering you to do something more complicated, like tying knots or managing the sail lines. Historians like to debate whether untrained passengers were ever pressed into helping during emergencies. You have a creeping suspicion you'll find out soon enough. You stand and take a cautious step toward the starboard rail, hoping for a breeze to clear your head. Instead, you find a trough where bilge water has pooled in a slick, iridescent film. You catch your reflection, a pale, slightly green version of yourself, and decide you don't need to look any longer. When you straighten, your knees pop like ancient hinges. You're already sore, and the day has barely begun. A sudden shout rings out, followed by a thump and a pained groan. You turn to see 2 sailors grappling with an amphora that has cracked open, bleeding a syrupy trail of spoiled wine. The smell is somehow worse than everything else. The broken jar wobbles in their grasp, and for a moment, it looks as though it will topple toward you. You scramble backward, nearly tripping over a coil of rope. The jar slams down, and the stench rolls across the deck like an invisible wave. You clamber a hand over your nose, but it does nothing. You think longingly of your bed back home, of clean sheets and the quiet hush of an apartment that doesn't rock beneath you. Remember that mat you thought was just damp. It's now soaked through, absorbing the latest spill. You crouch to lift it, but it's heavy with liquid, and amidst a sour burp of air as you move it, you set it down again and decide you'll stand for a while. The ship shifts course slightly, and the breeze turns, funneling every sour note of cargo and bilge straight into your face. You blink back tears and wonder if this is the part where you start to acclimate. It isn't. You will not acclimate. Near the stern, the helmsman stands braced at the tiller, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though daring it to move. His expression never changes, even when a sailor sidles up to share a complaint. The helmsman's only response is a grunt that somehow conveys centuries of disappointment. You decide he's the most intimidating man you've ever seen. You shuffle back to your damp patch of deck and sit again, hugging your knees. The ship groans, the ropes creak, and the smell clings to you like an accusation. You realize you spent most of this first day thinking of ways to distract yourself from how uncomfortable you are. It hasn't worked. Somewhere below deck, something thuds against the hull. Maybe it's just shifting cargo. Maybe it's something alive. You don't really want to know. You close your eyes and focus on your breathing, hoping you'll drift into a sort of doze that will spare you the next few hours. But the ship heaves again, and your eyes snap open. You're here. You're definitely here. The sailor stomps past, wiping his hands on his tunic. He pauses, glances at you with a look that says you're exactly as pitiful as you feel, and moves on without a word. You let out a slow sigh. If there was ever a time to reconsider your life decisions, this is it. But there's nowhere to go, except forward. The horizon tilts again, and you grip the edge of a crate for balance. Your stomach protests. Your head throbs, and that smell, yes, it's still there, seems to deepen as the day wanes. You are a passenger on a Roman cargo ship, and you're very much not enjoying yourself. You weigh core more accurately. You surface from a half-conscious stupor to the sound of something massive being heaved across the deck. Your back is stiff. Your clothes are damp in unsettling ways, and you have the distinct feeling you were supposed to be helping with this process. No one has bothered to wake you properly. But judging by the volume of shouting, your absence has not gone unnoticed. You force your eyes open and see a row of men straining under the weight of an amphora nearly as tall as you. Their faces are set in the grim determination of people resigned to hauling cargo forever. You rise, every joint protesting, and edge closer to the spectacle. The amphora wobbles, almost tipping into a coil of rope. A man with a scarred lip barks something sharp, and they steady it at the last possible moment. You try to look useful by nudging a smaller jar away from their path. This earns you a single nod, which feels like the highlight of your day. The process repeats. More amphora, more grunts, more sullen cooperation. You learn quickly that the Roman system of loading is less organized logistics and more heave everything aboard before someone changes their mind. The crates arrive in no particular order: grain beside fish sauce, all beside salted pork, and every container is treated with the same rough handling. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate efficiency or sheer chaos. You suspect the latter as you dodge a crate that nearly skims your shoulder. You glimpse a slave boy, no more than 12, struggling to keep pace with the adults. His tunic is stained darker than yours, and when he sets down his burden, he coughs wetly into his hand. Nobody pauses to notice. You wonder if he's been on this ship longer than he can remember. Probably. You shift your weight, feeling that dampness in your own clothes again, and try not to think too hard about how easily the body adjusts to hardship when there's no alternative. As you crouch to nudge another jar into alignment, your knees creak so loudly you half expect the nearest sailor to comment. Instead, he grunts approval and lumbers away to fetch the next load. You tell yourself that maybe you're finally getting the hang of this. That thought evaporates the instant you straighten and catch another noseful of the bilge's sweet, cloying perfume. Remember that first smell when you boarded. It's still here, stronger now, marinated into everything. You find yourself eyeing the crates of grain with suspicion. Some look suspiciously swollen, as though the cargo is fermenting from the inside. When you lean in to examine a crack in the wood, a sour puff of air hisses out, making you reel back. A sailor with a flattened nose notices your reaction and snorts. Better than it smells, he mutters without looking at you, then shuffles off to wrestle a barrel into place. That's not reassuring. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so are any illusions you had about this being a romantic adventure. Time passes in that peculiar way it does on a ship, sometimes slow as syrup, sometimes blinking by in a rush of activity. You help secure the cargo with ropes that smell like every bad memory you've ever had. You wedge amphorae so they won't topple when the ship rolls. You listen to the slap of the waves and the occasional, unmistakable sound of something scuttling, just out of sight. You suspect it's not the rats you should be worried about, but the countless insects that hitch rides in the grain sacks. Every time you think you might be getting used to the rhythm, something new surprises you. A crate splits along one seam, spilling olives in every direction. They bounce across the deck, slick as marbles, and you nearly land flat on your back trying to corral them another time. A barrel simply refuses to budge, and for men heave in unison, red-faced and swearing. Historians still debate whether Roman cargo ships were designed to handle these loads or merely survive them by luck and the occasional patch of tar. You find yourself developing small rituals to pass the time. You count the number of knots in the nearest section of railing. You pick out individual smells from the general reek: fish sauce, old rope, sweat, rancid oil. You imagine, wildly, that the amphorae are watching you, waiting to tip over at the worst possible moment. In the odd lull, you look up and trace the lines of the rigging against the bright sky, wondering what it would feel like to climb all the way to the masthead. Then you remember your knees and decide it's better not to find out. When you finally pause for what pauses as a break, you slump onto your mat and realize it's no drier than before. The sun is higher now, turning the deck into a warm, greasy griddle. You peel your damp tunic away from your skin and wish fervently that you could at least wash it. But fresh water is rationed for drinking, and no one wastes it on personal hygiene. You sigh, aware that you probably smell worse than any amphora here. The ship rolls again, more gently this time. For a moment, you let your eyes drift shut and imagine the world beyond this deck. Green fields, fresh bread, the quiet dignity of indoor plumbing. Then the ship lurches abruptly, and your fantasy dissolves in a fresh wave of nausea. You stand and stretch your arms, feeling a familiar crackle in your spine. Your hands are already calloused from handling the ropes and jars, the skin rougher than you've ever known it. You think of your bed again, that distant haven of clean sheets and soft pillows. Here, the closest thing you have to comfort is the knowledge that you're not the only miserable soul aboard. Misery, your learning, is better shared. A sailor passes by carrying a bucket of tar to seal a seam in the hole. He leaves a trail of black drips that will soon collect dust and footprints. You step over it carefully, determined not to add to your growing list of grime. As you ease back to your spot by the railing, you watch the horizon heave in a slow rhythm, and you wonder how much longer this day can possibly last. Quite a lot longer, it turns out. You take one last look at the deck, cluttered with amphorae and men who've long since stopped noticing the smell. Then you draw a deep breath you immediately regret, and steel yourself for whatever comes next. You're standing now, though your legs feel like they're attached to someone else's body, someone older, whose joints have opinions about everything. The deck lists gently under your feet, the ship easing out into deeper water. Every time you think you've found your balance, it shifts again, a reminder that nothing here is solid. You clutch the railing, which is sticky with salt and something less identifiable, and squint at the horizon. It's the color of tarnished brass, hazy with heat. You imagine, foolishly, that you can still see the faint outline of the port you left behind. But it's just a trick of your exhausted mind. That shore is gone. You are truly adrift now. A sailor stomps past, swinging a coil of rope over one shoulder. His bare feet slap the planks, leaving wet prints behind. You watch them fade as the sun dries them almost instantly. Then you look down and realize your own footprints are still damp, probably because your tunic is soaked through in patches that have nothing to do with seawater. Remember the first time you thought you'd get used to being damp? You were wrong. You are never going to be dry again. At the prow, a cluster of men gather round a barrel. One reaches inside and pulls out something that drips onto the deck. You look away quickly. Whatever it is, you don't want it to be your breakfast. Speaking of breakfast, your stomach chooses this moment to remind you that it's both empty and unhappy. You'd think the two would cancel each other out, but they don't. The ship creaks in protest as the wind changes direction, and a few of the sails ripple. A fresh round of shouts erupts as the crew adjusts the rigging. You try to step out of the way, but there's no truly safe place to stand. The entire deck is a lattice of ropes and crates and hazards. Historians still argue whether Roman sailors had formal ranks or just a hierarchy of whoever could shout loudest. Judging by the chaos around you, you bet on the latter. You edge back to your mat and sink down onto it. The boards are warm from the morning sun, but you know they'll turn scorching by afternoon. A few feet away, a sailor leans over the railing and empties the contents of his stomach into the sea with a grim resignation. He wipes his mouth on the back of his hand and trudges off without meeting your eye, at least. You're not alone in your misery. A sudden gust puffs the sail full, and the ship lurches forward with an enthusiasm you do not share. You grab the nearest crate to keep from pitching onto your side. The movement sets your head spinning, and you press upon to your forehead. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any chance of ordering takeout. Someone barks your name, though you're not sure you told anyone your name. So maybe it's just a noise that sounds like one and gestures urgently toward the mainmast. You scramble up, heart hammering, and find yourself drafted into some task you don't understand. A thick rope is pressed into your hands. It's rough and damp, leaving dark streaks across your palms. You pull when the others pull, lean back. When they lean, trying to match their rhythm, your arms burn almost immediately. The rope feels alive, thrumming with the movement of the sail above. You dare a glance up and nearly lose your balance again. The mast seems impossibly tall. It's cross-beam, a latticework of rigging that you hope you'll never have to climb. After what feels like an hour, but is probably only a few minutes, the sail is secured, and the tension in the rope eases. You let go, flex in your hands. The skin is already raw. You expect someone to yell at you, but the sailor closest to you just grunts in approval and moves on to the next job. You stand there, panting, half convinced you'll never straighten your spine again. The ship swings slowly on the swell. You can hear the hull groaning, the sails flapping, the muttered curses of men too tired to swear properly. Remember the amphora that nearly fell on you earlier. It's still there, lashed into place with a tangle of ropes that don't inspire much confidence. You consider moving further away, but decide it's too much effort. You stagger back to the railand. Brace yourself as another wave smacks the hull. Spray leaps up, catching you across the face. It's salty and cold, a temporary relief from the heat. You wipe it from your eyes and notice a thin trail of liquid oozing from under a crate. You don't investigate. You've learned better. For a moment, the wind drops, and the ship seems to settle. The quiet is almost pleasant. You close your eyes, imagining the stillness is permanent. Then the breeze kicks up again, snapping the sail and sending the vessel pitching forward. You stagger, arms windmilling, and catch yourself just before you hit the deck. A passing sailor smirks but doesn't comment. You decide you'd rather be ignored as midday approaches. The heat becomes oppressive. The sun bakes the deck, turning it into a griddle that steams every time a wave slops over the rail. Your damp clothes begin to dry in patches, only to reabsorb fresh sweat moments later. You wonder if you'll ever feel truly clean again. Probably not. Near the stern, a pair of sailors argue in low voices. You can't hear the words, but their gestures are sharp and impatient. One of them points toward the horizon, where a smudge of darker clouds is gathering. You suspect you'll be introduced to Roman storm navigation sooner than you'd like. Historians still debate whether these ships were sturdy enough to handle sudden squalls. You suspect you'll soon have an opinion. You shift your weight, trying to coax circulation back into your legs. Every muscle aches. Your mouth tastes of old bread and salt. You think wistfully of modern luxuries: a soft bed, a hot shower, a quiet evening where the floor doesn't move. Here, every moment is a negotiation with discomfort. A gull wheels overhead. Laughing at you in its gull way, you tilt your head back and watch it drift effortlessly on the wind. You can almost convince yourself it's mocking you on purpose. You exhale a shaky breath and lower your gaze to the endless expanse of water. It stretches in every direction, vast and indifferent. You close your eyes again, trying to pretend you're anywhere else. But when you open them, the ship is still here, and you are still part of its cargo. You've given up trying to pretend this is anything but awful. The day has aged into afternoon, and the sun has cooked the deck boards until they radiate heat. Through your soles, you shift your weight, hoping to find a cool spot. But it's all the same warm, slightly sticky, and tinged with the smell of fermented grain. Remember when you thought you'd adjust to the damp? Now you realize you gladly traded for the slow bake you're experiencing instead. You ondrift, weaving round barrels and stacks of amphorae, until you find the space that pauses. For your sleeping quarters, it's not much. A plank near the railing, partly sheltered by an overhang that drips condensation in slow, steady plops. A wheezing mule is tied nearby, its ribs showing through a hide the color of stale bread. Its tail flicks half-heartedly, the flies buzzing round its flanks. The mule is the only creature aboard that looks more miserable than you, which is somehow not comforting. You spread your mat across the plank, even though it smells like a damp cellar. When you sit down, a small puff of air escapes it, carrying that unforgettable cargo hold scent. You sigh. You were hoping for a brief nap, but the deck has other plans. Each creak and groan sets your nerves jangling. And then there's the mule. It lets out a wet cough that sounds almost human, startling you back to full awareness. Historians still argue whether animals were commonly kept on Roman ships for a fresh meat or simply as beasts of burden. Either way, you're not sure which possibility is more depressing. After a while, you decide that lying here is only making things worse. You stand and walk a slow circle around your little territory. A cracked barrel leaks something dark and sticky onto the planks. You sidestep it and realize you can't tell whether it's wine or oil, or something more sinister. Probably best not to know. The ship pitches gently, as though trying to rock you to sleep. It doesn't work. You hear footsteps overhead as sailors adjust the rigging, their voices low and hoarse. The shadows are lengthening now, stripes of dusk. Across the deck, you feel the day's fatigue settling into your bones. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any illusion that this might be a tolerable experience. You lean against the railing and watch the horizon dissolve into a smudge of purple. A gull drifts alongside for a moment, eyeing you as though to see if you've learned your lesson yet. You haven't. You're still here, still clinging to a hope that maybe tomorrow will be easier. But you know better. Somewhere nearby, a barrel shifts, creaking against the ropes that hold it. You glance over and watch as a sailor taps the bindings, testing them with calloused fingers. He catches you staring and gives you a look that says, quite clearly, "Don't even think about helping." You look away quickly, feeling your cheeks warm. Remember that time you tried to appear useful? It's still haunting you. The mule coughs again, a ragged sound that makes you wince. You tell yourself you're lucky not to be tied to a post in the same state. You are not sure you believe it, as the wind picks up. The ship lists, and a chill runs through your sweat-soaked tunic. The evening breeze carries a new note in the medley of smells, something sharp. Like old vinegar, you swallow hard and press a hand over your nose. The helmsman shuffles past, carrying a lantern that swings light across the deck in pale arcs. His face is carved with lines, and his eyes look hollow in the flickering glow. He doesn't glance at you. He doesn't need to. You're just another piece of cargo to him, another burden to keep alive until the next port. You sit down again, wrapping your arms round your knees. The mule shifts, letting out a sigh so where you feel it in your own lungs. You almost laugh, but the sound would come out cracked and bitter. Instead, you lean your head back against the railing and close your eyes. The ship rolls beneath you, and for a moment, you imagine you're weightless, unmoored from the reality of this journey. Then the mule sneezes wetly, and you're dragged back to the smell, the damp, the aching sense that you've made a terrible mistake. You open your eyes and look round. The deck is a patchwork of shadows, shapes that flicker and shift with every swing of the lantern. Somewhere below, the rowers are locked in their own rhythm, chained to benches you haven't seen but can easily imagine. Historians still debate how many men it took to propel a ship like this when the wind failed. You're fairly certain none of them volunteered. You tilt your head back, tracing the rigging against the last shred of daylight. The ropes look black against the darkening sky, stretching upward like a web. You shiver and tell yourself it's the wind, though you know it's something else, and awareness that you have no control here, that the ship's moods will dictate everything. As darkness falls, the sounds shift. The shouting has faded into murmurs, the hammering of the rigging into softer creaks. You feel the day's fatigue descending, heavy as a wet blanket. You think of your bed again, clean sheets, still air, silence. Here, you have none of those. Here, you have a plank, a mule, and a horizon that refuses to stay still. You close your eyes once more, hoping that sleep will come quickly. But the ship rocks, the mule coughs, and the smell, yes, it's still there, seeps into every breath you take. You are on a Roman cargo ship, and you are not going to forget it. You wake to darkness so complete you have to touch your own face to reassure yourself you're still here. The ship is breathing round you, timbers flexing, ropes groaning, water sighing against the hull. You hear the slow shuffle of footsteps overhead, punctuated by the occasional clink of metal on wood. Your back feels as though it's fused to the plank. When you try to shift, a bolt of pain shoots across your shoulders. You groan, softly, because there's no one to complain to and no point in doing it anyway. The mule is asleep. If that ragged wheeze can be called sleep, you envy it. You sit up, peeling your tunic from the plank, and instantly regret moving. Every muscle has stiffened overnight, as though your body has finally accepted that this is your life now. Remember that first wave of regret when you boarded. It's still here, grown heavier with each hour you've spent in this floating barn. Somewhere, toward the bow, a bell clangs. It's not a sound you've heard before, sharper, more urgent than the work calls you've gotten used to ignoring. You stand, bracing yourself against the railing as the deck tilts. The air smells different. Not fresh, or nothing is ever fresh but charged. Like the moment before a storm. You squint into the darkness, trying to see what's happening. A lantern swings in a wide arc, illuminating a cluster of sailors gathered round the mainmast. Their voices are low, but the tone is unmistakable. Something's wrong. The wind picks up, tugging at your hair and teasing the damp edges of your tunic into fresh discomfort. You taste salt on your lips, sharper than before. When you look out across the water, You see it lines of foam tracing the surface in frantic patterns. The waves aren't high yet, but they're changing, building an energy that makes your gut clench. Historians still argue whether Roman ships could handle sudden storms, or if they survived only by luck and frantic patchwork repairs. You're about to find out firsthand. A hand clamps your shoulder, startling a yelp out of you. You turn to see a sailor's face, barely visible in the flickering light. He points at the coil of rope near your feet, then to the railing. You nod, because you don't have words, and you bend to grab the rope. It's rough against your palms, still damp from yesterday's sea spray. You follow as he moves along the edge of the deck, securing lines that look as though they've held for decades longer than they were designed to. Each knot you tie feels insufficient, as if the storm will simply snare and undo them all with one contemptuous gust. The first wave hits just as you finish fastening the rope. It's not huge, but the impact is enough to send you sprawling against the nearest crate. You gasp as your shoulder connects with the wood. The mule behind you brays in startled protest. Another wave crashes over the bow, slapping the deck with cold force that soaks your tunic canoe. You shiver, and not just from the chill. You scramble upright, heart hammering. The ship lurches again, and for a moment you think it might not right itself. But it does slowly, creaking like a living thing in pain. A voice shouts something you don't catch. You see shadows moving in the rigging as sailors climb higher, silhouettes swaying against the storm-smeared sky. You grip the railing with both hands, feeling the rope bite into your skin, and you wish you could vanish into the planks. A sheet of spray slaps your face, salty and cold. You sputter, wiping your eyes, only to be doused again a moment later. You realize you're shaking, whether from fear, exhaustion, or the endless damp. You can't tell, probably all three. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any part of you that believed this voyage could be endured with dignity. Another wave surges over the rail, sweeping across the deck with a force that rattles your teeth. A barrel breaks free of its lashings and careens past, thudding against the opposite wall before rolling back in your direction. You fling yourself sideways, landing hard on your hip. The barrel misses you by inches. You lie there, chest heaving, as the ship pitches and the mule lets out another panicked shriek. Remember that damp match you hated so much? You'd give anything to be back on it now instead of skidding across the boards in the dark. You drag yourself upright, bracing against the railing as the storm builds round you. Lightning flickers across the clouds, momentarily revealing the frantic dance of the rigging and the pale, wide-eyed faces of the men clinging to it. A sailor crashes down from the mast, landing in a heap near your feet. He groans, clutching his arm. But before you can move to help, another wave smacks the deck and drives you both back against the crates. The impact knocks the breath from your lungs. You gulp air. Tasting salt and panic, you realize you've been repeating the same thought in your head for minutes. I don't want to be here, but here you are, and here you'll stay. The wind howls now, a voice bigger than the ship itself. You imagine it laughing at your small, ridiculous struggles. You cling to the railing, nails scraping the wet wood, and wonder if this is what surrender feels like. Not the noble kind, but the exhausted, hopeless acceptance that you're no longer in control of anything. The storm rages on. I'll slip past without your noticing. The world shrinks to the heaving deck, the lashing rain, the cold that seeps through your skin and settles deep in your bones. You don't know when you stopped caring whether you were soaked or hungry or bruised. All that matters is that you're still here, clinging to this miserable ship as it thrashes its way across the sea. At last, as dawn begins to smudge the sky with a weary gray, the waves subside. The wind slackens to a ragged whisper. You peel your hands from the railing, surprised to find them still attached. You're soaked, trembling, and hollowed out. The mule is still alive, though it looks as though it regrets the fact you feel the same way. You lower yourself to the deck, every muscle quivering. The storm has passed. You survived it. But as you stare out over the endless water, you know this was only the first test. The ship groans beneath you, already preparing the next. You don't remember falling asleep, but you must have. When you open your eyes, the sky has brightened to a washed-out blue, and the ship has settled into a sluggish roll. For a moment, you almost believe you dreamed the storm, that you didn't spend hours clinging to the railing like a barnacle. Then you try to move, and the pain in your shoulders proves otherwise. Your tunic clings to you in cold patches, and your hands are so raw you can see little splinters embedded in the creases of your palms. The mule is still here, breathing in shallow wheezes. You stare at each other for a long moment. It blinks, as if to say, "I told you so." You look away, bracing your palms on the planks as you ease yourself upright. Every muscle protests. Your legs feel as though they've been replaced with something heavier, maybe amphory filled with. See what earned? Regret. Remember when you thought you'd adjust? You have. Just not in any way you hoped for. You shuffle to the side rail and peer over the edge. The sea is a sullen green, streaked with foam. You can still feel it moving under you, slow and persistent as your regret. You close your eyes and breathe, hoping the air will taste clean after the storm. It doesn't. If anything, the smell has matured into something sour and strange. Like rancid oil left in the sun too long. A low shout draws your attention aft. A sailor is prying the lid off a barrel with a short iron bar, his face set in an expression of resigned disgust. The lid gives way with a moist pop, and an odor wafts across the deck. Even at this distance, you gag. The sailor tilts the barrel, so you can see the contents. A sludgy mess that used to be dried fish, now mostly a grey soup. He lets out a sigh that seems to come from somewhere deep inside and begins ladling the mess into smaller buckets. You watch, feeling a terrible certainty. This is breakfast. You don't want to get closer, but you do. You drift toward the gathering crew, drawn by that grim inevitability of hunger. When you reach the circle of men, the smell hits you full force, a rotting tang that curls your stomach. A bucket is thrust into your hands. You stare into it, hoping you're hallucinating. You're not. You scoop out a small portion and step away, cradling it as though it might lunge for your face. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any last illusion that Roman cargo food was remotely edible. You settle onto your mat, which has somehow found a way to get wetter overnight. You cross your legs, balancing the bucket in your lap, and steel yourself. You dip your fingers into the sludge and bring them to your mouth. The taste is worse than the smell, sharp, rotten, woolly. You swallow hard, feeling your stomach clench. You remind yourself that you need strength. You remind yourself you survived the storm. You remind yourself none of this will matter when you're finally ashore. None of it helps. You look up and catch the mule watching you. You can't tell if it pities you or simply wants your breakfast. Either way, you envy its simple expectations. A sailor sits beside you without warning. He doesn't speak. He just eats methodically, as though consuming the most revolting meal imaginable is simply part of the job. You suppose it. His face is lined, his eyes half-lidded. You wonder how many storms he's survived, probably more than he can remember. You watch him for a moment, then force yourself to take another mouthful. You focus on the motion of your jaw, on the way the ship tilts under you, on anything except the taste. Remember the amphora of rancid wine that almost fell on you. You'd almost prefer that now. At least it was a clear threat, not this slow, creeping disgust. Somewhere aft, a voice calls out. The sailor beside you sets his bucket aside and rises, moving with the resigned deliberation of a man who knows the next task will be as miserable as the last. You don't follow him. You stay where you are, trying to breathe through your mouth. Eventually, you set your bucket down and lean back against the rail, wiping your fingers on the least filthy patch of your tunic. You watch the water slide by, slow and indifferent. Historians still argue whether the Romans salted their fish for a preservation or simply hoped the cold sea would do the work, judging by what you just ate. You're inclined to believe in the latter, and in a complete lack of foresight, you close your eyes and listen to the creak of the ropes. You try to imagine you're somewhere else, anywhere else. A quiet kitchen, a warm bed, a place where the air doesn't smell like old fish and mildew. But the fantasy slips away the moment a fresh gust blows across the deck. You sigh and open your eyes. The world hasn't changed. Neither have you. A gull wheels overhead, dropping something unmentionable onto the crate beside you. You consider this an omen. Whether good or bad, you don't care. You're too tired. You pull your knees up to your chest, wrapping your arms round them. The mule shifts behind you, sighing through its cracked lips. You can't blame it. Somewhere in the rigging, a sailor hums a thin, reedy tune. The sound drifts across the deck, threading through the stink and the gloom. You don't recognize the melody, but it makes you ache in a way you can't quite name. You let your head rest against the railing, and for a moment, just a moment, you almost drift into something like sleep. You drift in and out of a restless doze. Never fully asleep, but never fully awake either. The ship moves beneath you like some enormous animal, never letting you forget that you're far from land. When you finally open your eyes, the sun is higher, throwing glare across the deck so bright you have to squint. Every surface gleams with dried salt, and the smell has shifted again, ripening into something you'd rather not describe. You push yourself upright, feeling your spine creak like an old door. Your knees pop as you stand. You tell yourself it's progress, you're still moving, still upright. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is your sense of hope that this voyage might improve with time. Near the bow, a group of sailors is fussing over a tangle of ropes. You recognize the frayed length of rigging you saw the day you boarded, only now it's split nearly in two, the fibers splaying apart like an old broom. You drift closer. Compelled by curiosity, you instantly regret. One sailor fingers the tier with a resigned expression. Another rubs his forehead, muttering under his breath. Historians still argue whether Roman ships were feats of engineering or just accidents waiting to happen. Watching them now, you suspect they were both. Someone lifts the rope and gives it an experimental tug. The loose strands part with a soft R.I.P. You flinch, half expecting the mast to collapse in a spectacular display of incompetence. But nothing happens. Yet, a length of spare rope is brought out, and the men set to splicing it with slow, practiced movements. You wonder how many times they've done this, probably more than they'd admit. You linger for a few minutes, hoping to see the repair finished, but your legs begin to ache from standing still. You retreat to your little corner of deck, where your mat waits, still damp, still faintly reeking of stale seawater. You sit, cross-legged, and stare at your hands. They're red and rough, the skin peeling along your knuckles. You flex your fingers, testing their stiffness, and think how soft they used to be before you boarded this floating warehouse. A muffled groan draws your gaze aft. Two sailors are struggling with a barrel wedged behind a stack of crates. One of them wedges a board underneath it, trying to lever it out. The other leans his shoulder against the barrel, shoving with a low grunt. You know better than to offer help. Your last attempt earned you a look so withering you felt it in your bones. So you watch, silent, as they inch the barrel free. When it finally tips forward, it lands with a hollow thunk. A trickle of liquid seeps from a crack near the base. The men ignore it. You suppose they've seen worse. Remember the rancid fish soup you choked down this morning? You can still taste it if you think too hard. You swallow and look away. You shift your weight and peer over the side. The sea rolls under the hole, green and endless. A faint line on the horizon makes you wonder if you're hallucinating land. But when you blink, it's gone. Just another trick of the light. You rub your eyes and sigh. There's no shore in sight. And you know better than to hope. The day crawls past in slow increments. A gull lands on the railing beside you, cocks its head, and pecks experimentally at your mat. You swat it away without enthusiasm. It flutters off, offended. As though you violated some unspoken rule of shared misery, the wind shifts again, bringing a new, acrid note to the air. You wrinkle your nose and glance around, trying to pinpoint the source. It doesn't take long. A sailor appears with a bucket of tar, sloshing thick black sludge across the deck to patch a seam. The smell is immediate and overpowering sharp, enough to sting your eyes. You press your sleeve to your nose, but it does nothing. You try to imagine fresh air, but your brain refuses to cooperate. You watch him smear the tar along the crack in the planks. He works with steady efficiency, as though sealing the ship's wounds is as routine as tying a knot. When he's finished, he sits back on his heels and surveys his work with a nod. You think he must feel something like satisfaction, but it's hard to read his expression through the grime. He catches you staring and raises an eyebrow. You look away, focusing on your own hands again. The deck groans as the ship settles onto a fresh course. You feel the change in your gut, a queasy shift that reminds you of the storm. You grip the railing, bracing yourself against the memory. You survived it once. You'll survive it again, if you must. A sailor drops onto a crate nearby, rubbing his temples. He glances your way and mutters something you don't catch. You give him a tired shrug. He doesn't try again. You sit together in companionable silence, two strangers bound by the same foul-smelling fate. Remember that first morning, when you thought the ship couldn't smell any worse? You were so young then. You almost smile at the thought. You close your eyes, inhaling the bitter tang of tar and salt. When you open them, nothing has changed. The horizon is still empty. The deck is still a patchwork of grime and sweat. You are still here. A gull cries overhead, a thin, ragged sound that feels like mockery. You rest your forehead against your knees and let the sway of the ship lull you into a shallow trance. This is your life now. The creak of timbers, the stake of cargo, the knowledge that the end is nowhere in sight. You are not sure what wakes you, a change in the light, a shift in the deck's rhythm, or simply the ache in your back that never really fades. You open your eyes to see that the sun has slipped lower, gilding everything in a yellow haze that makes the grime look almost pretty. Almost. You stretch, feeling your spine complain in every language it knows. The mule beside you flutters its lips and shifts, kicking up a sour waft of air. You sigh. Of course it's still here. Of course you are. The ship feels quieter than usual. You glance round and realize why most of the sailors are gathered in a loose knot near the midship, voices pitched low in what sounds like an easy argument. You stand, brushing crumbs, don't ask, from what off your tunic, and edge closer until you can catch a few words. Tax records, inspectors, bribes. The words drift past you, muffled by the creak of the rigging. You watch as a man you haven't seen before steps aboard from a small skiff tethered to the hull. He's dressed in tunic and cloak, the folds too, clean for any real work. A tax official, you guess. His nose is wrinkled, though whether from disgust or calculation is impossible to say. The crate is pried open under his supervision, revealing amphorae packed in straw. He leans over, sniffing the top of one with theatrical distaste. A sailor tries to explain something, but the official waves him silent. You can't help but notice the bulge in the man's purse as he moves. Historians still argue whether Roman inspectors were genuine enforcers of the law or simply parasites skimming their share from every voyage. Judging by the looks on the sailors' faces, you suspect no one aboard has any illusions. You edge back, unwilling to be mistaken for someone with opinions worth soliciting. As you retreat to your patch of deck, you can feel the tension thickening the air. Like a thunderstorm that hasn't quite decided whether to break, you sit down, cross-legged, and pretend to study the grain stains on your mat. One of them looks suspiciously like Italy. If Italy was shaped by mildew. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is your patience for the endless parade of petty authorities. Time drags by as the inspection continues. Every crate is poked, every barrel tapped. The official occasionally makes a note on the wax tablet, his stylus scratching like an insect. You wish he'd get on with it. You're tired, you're hungry, and the mule is eyeing you as though considering whether you're edible. You shift. You're a mat further from its tether just in case. Finally, after what feels like hours, the official seems satisfied or at least ready to move on to the next ship he can torment. He accepts a folded pouch from the captain with the solemnity of a priest receiving an offering. The purse disappears into his cloak. A few last instructions are muttered. Then he steps back into the skiff and is rowed away without so much as a backward glance. A long breath seems to pass over the ship. The sailors relax minimally, though no one smiles. You watch them begin to re-stack the cargo, sealing lids and knotting ropes with quick, tight hands. You think of all the work it took to load everything in the first place, and how much of it has just been undone in the name of bureaucracy. Remember the first time you watched them wrestle a barrel into place. You thought it looked exhausting. You were right. A breeze picks up, fluttering the edge of your tunic. You glance over the side to see the skiff shrinking against the horizon, a dark blot against the glittering water. Part of you envies the official, free to step onto solid ground whenever he likes. The rest of you hopes he trips on his own cloak. The crew moves with a dogged rhythm, too drained to mutter complaints. You watch as the cracked barrel from before is inspected again and sealed with fresh wax. The man handling it catches your eye and gives a small shrug, as if to say, "It'll hold until it doesn't." You nod, though you're not sure why. Solidarity, perhaps. In the shared knowledge that this entire voyage is a balancing act you're all pretending to believe in. A gull lands on the rail, pecking curiously at the knots. You flick your fingers at it, but it ignores you. You don't have the energy to try again. You close your eyes and lean back against the nearest crate, breathing shallowly through your mouth. The air is still rank with tar and salt and old fish, but after so long, it's become almost background noise, almost. You imagine the inspectors bragging later over cheap wine about the poor souls they inspected. Today, you imagine yourself as a footnote in some bored clerk's record, one passenger of questionable purpose. The ship shifts again as the last of the cargo is secured. You hear the captain's voice, lower than you've ever heard it, giving orders to set sail. The crew stirs, as if awakening from a long stupor. Ropes are coiled, sails adjusted. Complaints swallowed down in favor of movement. You push yourself upright and brace for another stretch of open water. Remember when you thought the worst part of this journey would be the smell. You were so charmingly naive. You rub your face and sigh. You've learned better now. The ship slides back into motion. The horizon remains empty. The gulls will overhead, still watching. You take one last look at the place where the inspector's skiff disappeared and whisper a silent farewell to the idea of fair taxation. Then you turn away. There's nothing left to see except the endless sea and the knowledge that you're not done suffering yet. You think the ship moves more reluctantly after the inspection, as if even the hull resents having been poked and prodded by petty authority. Each creak and groan sounds fractionally more exhausted than before. You lean your elbows on the rail, staring into the bruised water and feeling like you've aged 20 years since boarding. Your reflection wavers below, gaunt and unrecognizable. You look away. A sailor tramps past with a coil of rope over his shoulder, leaving wet footprints that evaporate almost immediately in the sun. The heat has returned, baking the deck until it smells like a soup made of tar, salt, and something much older. You lift your foot and peel it from the planks, your soul outlined in grime. Remember when you thought you'd get used to the texture of the deck? You have. In the sense that you're too tired to care anymore. Docked at the stern, a pair of men haul up a bucket from the hold. The bucket wobbles, sloshing pale water over the rim. You watch it swing and think with sudden dread of the drinking barrels you last saw during loading. The ones that looked, even then, too small for so many mouths. When the bucket is set down, you catch the smell metallic, stale, edged with something like mildew. A sailor dips a ladle and sips, face pinched. He doesn't spit it out. Instead, he lifts the bucket and carries it away. You swallow dryly, your tongue thick in your mouth. You don't want to know how low the stores have fallen, but you suspect. You'll find out soon enough. A few minutes later, the same man reappears, carrying another bucket and stopping beside your mat. He holds it out with a look that is not quite pity. You take it in both hands, feeling the warm weight slosh. You raise it to your lips, breathing through your mouth. The taste is as bad as you feared, flat and rusty, as though someone soaked old nails in seawater. You manage 3 swallows before setting it aside, stomach churning. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is the possibility of any beverage you'd willingly consume. You wipe your mouth with the back of your wrist and sit, eyes half closed, feeling the ship tilt under you. The day has settled into the particular kind of heat that saps your will to move. Even the mule looks listless, its sides heaving in slow, damp breaths. You shift your mat to a sliver of shade cast by the mast. It doesn't help much. Somewhere forward, the captain's voice rumbles, issuing orders that nobody bothers to shout back. The crew moves with the sluggish resignation of men who've accepted their thirst as part of the scenery. You watch them check the ropes again. Though you can see from here they're frayed nearly to snapping, historians still argue whether Roman cargo voyages planned for these shortages or simply hoped each trip would end before everything ran out. From where you sit, it feels like the latter. The mule coughs, a damp wheeze that rattles the boards. You close your eyes and imagine your bed again, cool sheets, clean water. The sweet hush of a world without constant motion. You hold that thought, like a talisman, until the ship pitches, sloshing your bucket across the planks and jolting you back to reality. You lunge, catching it before it spills. Your shoulder flares with pain. You grit your teeth and ease the bucket back to the safest place you can find wedged against your hip. It feels warmer than before, which is somehow worse. You rub your eyes and sigh. Remember the storm. How you thought nothing could be more exhausting than clinging to the rail through hours of battering. Waves. You were so hopeful. You didn't know the slow attrition of thirst and monotony could be worse. But it is. This is the kind of suffering that seeps under your skin and stays there. A gull drifts overhead, trailing a thin, jeering cry. You squint up at it, shading your face. The bird circles once, then wheels away toward the horizon. You envy its effortless, Freedom so much your chest aches. The crew has resumed their routines. One man kneels to smear fresh tar along a seam that never seems to stay sealed. Another heaves an amphora upright and ties it down for the 10th time in as many days. You watch them, feeling an odd kinship in your sheer fatigue. You've all been reduced to the same bare essentials: thirst, sweat, and the simple desire to survive until the next port. You lift your bucket again, daring another sip. The warmth has intensified the taste. You swallow anyway, because you have to. When you set it down, your hands shake a little. Isela pauses. Pausing to glance at you, his eyes are dull. But there's a flicker of something that might be understanding. Or maybe he's just as curious to see whether you last the day. You lower your gaze, unwilling to find out which it is. The sun blazes overhead. The ship creaks, easing across an endless expanse of green water. You rest your head against the railing, breathing shallowly. You are on a Roman cargo ship, and your thirst is only just beginning. You don't remember drifting off, but you must have, because when you blink your eyes open, the shadows are longer and the heat has softened into a sour, tepid dampness. For a blissful moment, you almost forget where you are. Then you catch the smell of old rope, rancid grain, the mule's steady exhalation, and your illusions collapse like a rotten crate. You push yourself upright, your joints stiff and unwilling. Your mouth feels like it's been lined with wool. You reach for your bucket, dreading the warm metallic taste, but it's empty. At some point while you slept, someone must have come by to collect the dregs, or maybe it simply tipped over. You are not sure which possibility feels worse. You swallow, feeling the dryness stick in your throat. A commotion rises near the midship, low voices sharpened by urgency. You haul yourself to your feet and edge closer, weaving between barrels and coils of rope. A sailor is crouched beside a crate, tapping the lid with the back of a knife. Each tap produces a hollow echo that doesn't match the others. You watch as he lifts the lid and peers inside. Whatever he sees makes his face flatten into an expression of exhausted dread. You crane your neck, trying to see. Inside the crate, a nest of straw holds amphorism intact. Some cracked, one split open entirely. The grain inside is wet, clumped together in grayish lumps. The smell hits you a heartbeat later sweet, rotting, edged with something sour that coats your tongue even from a distance. You gag and press a hand to your mouth. Remember when you thought the rancid fish breakfast was the worst scent you'd endure? It's still there, but this is giving it stiff competition. A second sailor appears with a ledger tucked under his arm. He leans in, scribbling something while the first man lifts a shard of pottery with 2 fingers. The piece drips as he turns it over. A third man points at the surrounding crates, then gestures to the stern. You can almost hear the words he's not saying. If this is bad, what about the rest? Historians still argue whether Roman cargo ships had reliable systems for inspecting stores mid-voyage, or whether every trip was a gamble with rot. Watching these men work, you suspect the latter. You watch as they ease the broken amphora out and set it aside. A puddle spreads slowly across the boards, glistening in the last sunlight. No one makes any effort to clean it. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any trace of your appetite. You retreat a few paces and sit on your mat, wrapping your arms round your knees. A breeze stirs the damp hair at your temples. It smells of salt and the unshakable conviction that everything here is getting steadily worse. You close your eyes, but the image of that soggy grain clings to the back of your eyelids. You imagine it spreading through the hold, seeping into every sack and barrel. You swallow again, wishing for water that isn't warm or sour. A gull drifts overhead, then drops onto a crate. tilting its head as though it's considering a meal of your misery. You glare at it. It doesn't budge. From somewhere below decks, you hear the thud of barrels being shifted. The deck vibrates under your thighs, and you imagine the rowers chained in the dock. Their lives a slow grind of oars and heat. You wonder whether they're fed the same rotting grain or something even worse. You decide not to think about it too long. The sailors begin resealing the damaged crates. A layer of pitch is daubed over the cracked amphora before it's set aside. As if cosmetics can disguise the rot inside, you watch, a dull curiosity mixing with your dread. Remember the frayed rigging from days ago? It's still there, but you'd almost forgotten, distracted by each fresh discomfort. When they finish, the men scatter back to their routines. One limps away, favoring a leg that's clearly been injured before. Another stops near your mat, rubbing the back of his neck. He meets your eyes, and in that look, you see the same thought you've been nursing. It won't be long before everything smells like this. He moves on without a word. You look down at your hands, palms striped with old blisters and new grime. You flex your fingers, feeling the grit grind against your skin. For the first time, you wonder what it will be like to step onto dry land again, to feel the ground hold steady under your feet. You suspect it will take days for the swaying to leave your bones. The mule coughs behind you, a ragged sound that splashes something onto the planks. You don't look. You've seen enough for one day. You lean back against the crate behind you and watch the fading light crawl across the deck. Each wave lifts the ship just enough to remind you that you're still at its mercy, that you will be for who knows how much longer. You close your eyes and imagine you're somewhere else. But when you open them, nothing has changed. You're still here, and the grain is still rotting. You wake to the sour certainty that something has gone wrong again. The air is heavier. The smell worse low, musty reek that reminds you of wet cloth left too long in a corner. You sit up slowly, every vertebra announcing itself. Dawn is little more than a smudge of pale light across the deck, and for one delusional moment, you pretend you don't see the puddles glistening near the hatches. But you do. A sailor moves past you. Lantern swinging low, the light splashes across the planks and shows a trail of liquid seeping from under a stack of crates. He stops, sighs, and kneels to pry one free. You watch as he levers up the lid. Even from yards away, you catch the first waft grain gone to mush, a yeasty stink that feels thick enough to chew. Remember that broken amphora yesterday. It's multiplied. You swallow dryly. Another sailor appears, scratching sleep from his eyes. He peers into the crate and mutters something you can't hear. The first man just rubs the bridge of his nose and gestures toward the hold. More barrels are. Hold up. The inspection begins again. Only this time no one bothers to look surprised. You can tell by the way they move that this is a familiar routine. The cataloguing of slow decay. Historians still argue whether Roman cargo ships were designed to keep provisions dry or whether the builders simply hoped the sea would be in a forgiving mood. Watching these men poke at ruined stores, you suspect it was mostly the latter. You push yourself upright, feeling the mat peel stickily away from your tunic, and drift closer. One of the sailors looks up as you approach. His eyes are rimmed red from fatigue. He jerks his chin at the spreading puddle and says, in a voice as dry as old parchment, "No one tells you the grain sweats." Then he goes back to ladling out handfuls of the spoiled cargo and dumping them into a barrel already half full of sludge. You stand there for a while, unsure what to do with your hands. Eventually you step away, weaving between crates and coils. A rope. You pause near the rail, pressing your palms flat to the damp wood. You watch the horizon for some sign of land. There's none. Just the same unbroken expanse of green and gray. The same gulls tracing lazy loops overhead. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is the last scrap of your hope for a clean breakfast. The deck lists slightly as the ship changes course. A wave slaps the hull, spraying your ankles. You don't bother moving. You're already soaked in sweat, salt, and the constant reminder that everything here is quietly falling apart. You lean over the rail and spit into the water. Though it doesn't make you feel any better, somewhere near the stern, a rope snaps with a sharp, whip-like crack. You flinch, heart leaping. A shout rises, and men scramble to catch a barrel as it topples sideways. They manage to stop it before it rolls over the edge, but only just. One man straightens. Pressing a hand to the small of his back, he catches Yura and gives a weary shrug. You nod in silent agreement. This ship is determined to break. Everyone aboard. You drift back to your mat and sink down. You rest your chin on your knees and close your eyes. For a moment, you pretend the ship is steady, that the air doesn't smell like fermenting despair. But the illusion collapses when the wind shifts, stirring the scent of spoiled grain into something richer and far more offensive. The mule shifts behind you, stamping a hoof against the deck. You turn just in time to see it tug at the rope tethering it to the railing. The knot holds. Barely. You imagine what would happen if the animal came loose, what fresh chaos it would add to this floating catastrophe. You decide you'd rather not dwell on it. A sailor approaches with a cup in one hand, offering it without ceremony. You take it and sniff cautiously. The water is warm, tinged with that same metallic note you're learning to hate. You sip anyway, because the alternative is thirst that carves behind your eyes. The liquid tastes like old coins left in the rain. You swallow and set the cup aside, rubbing your thumb across your cracked low lip. Remember that first sip you took when you boarded, how you thought it couldn't get worse. You smile, thin and humorless. You didn't know the half of it. The crew moves round you, their steps slow and deliberate. Every gesture says they expect something else to break before the day is out. One man stops to adjust a lashing. Another drags a fresh coil of rope into place. You wonder if any of them remember what dry land feels like, or if the ship has become their entire world. You are not sure which possibility frightens you more. You stand, stretching your arms overhead until your shoulders pop. The gulls are back, swooping low to investigate the grain puddles. One lands near your foot and pecks at a lump of sludge. Apparently satisfied, you watch it, feeling an odd, distant envy for its complete lack of standards. When the gull finally flutters off, you sit again, folding your legs under you. The ship creaks, the cargo sweats, the wind shifts. You are still here, still a reluctant witness to every small failure this voyage insists on offering. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow. You are not at peace, but you are too tired to be properly angry anymore. The ship drifts on, carrying you and your shared misery toward a horizon that never seems any closer. You'd hoped the dawn would bring some fresh relief, maybe a breeze to scrub away the smell. Maybe even the faintest glimpse of land. Instead, you get heat, heavy, unkind. The kind that settles on your shoulders and seeps into your skull until you feel like you're breathing through a wet rag. You push yourself upright, legs trembling a little, and brace your hand against the railing. The wood feels as though it's baking from the inside out. The mule stirs behind you, flicking its ears and issuing a sigh so deep and despairing you almost apologize for existing near it. You look round, trying to decide whether moving would make you feel any better. It probably won't, but sitting still is almost worse, because it gives you time to notice that the puddle of spoiled grain has crept further across the deck overnight. The sour edge to the air has deepened into something you can feel clinging to the back of your tongue. A sailor tramps past, carrying an amphor over one shoulder. He pauses, adjusting his grip. and mutters that if the weather holds, the rest of the cargo will rot before you make port. He doesn't look at you when he says it. Maybe he's talking to himself. Maybe he's talking to the mule. You suspect neither of you has the energy to respond. You shuffle to the port rail and lean over, peering into the slow, sluggish waves. They look almost soapy in the heat. Thick and green and gently heaving. You squint at the horizon. No land, no sail, just the same endless expanse. Remember when you imagined landfall as a certainty, something that would arrive eventually if you just held out long enough. You are not sure you believe that anymore. You draw back, turning to see the captain standing near the helm. He looks older than you remember, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, face set in that expression you've come to recognize as Roman stoicism barely masking exhaustion. He barks a short order, and a pair of sailors move to check the barrels lashed near the stern. One of them tips a lid aside, and a collective groan rises as they see what's inside. You don't need to look. You already know. The fresh water has begun to turn. Historians still argue whether Roman voyagers planned adequately for spoilage or whether they simply hoped for the best and lied about the rest. Watching these men scrape the last dregs of usable water from the casks, you suspect it was mostly the latter. One of them carries a bucket toward you, careful not to slosh it over the rim. He sets it down and gestures that you should take your share. You nod, heart sinking. You bend, dipping the ladle, and lift it to your lips. The warmth is worse than before, and the taste sour. Metallic, unmistakably tainted makes you gag. But you swallow, because you have to. When you lower the ladle, your hand trembles. Meanwhile, your phone is dead. But so is any comfortable illusion that water is just water. You straighten slowly, rolling your shoulders against the ache. The deck radiates heat, shimmering in waves you can almost see. The mule has laid down, sides heaving. You watch it for a moment, unsure whether to feel pity or kinship. You decide it's probably both. A gull lands near the spoiled grain, pecking at it with bright, greedy eyes. You wonder if it will regret that meal later. You almost hope it does. You shift your mat into the only scrap of shade you can find, a narrow band cast by the mainmast stand. Ease yourself onto it. The boards are still hot enough to make you wince. The crew moves round you in a kind of weary ballet. One man tugs at the ropes holding a barrel upright, finds them frayed nearly through, and sighs before tying on fresh lengths. Another is smearing a terry paste along the seams. Sealing in the stink, you watch them without really seeing, your gaze drifting out to the blank horizon again. Remember the storm, how you thought nothing could feel more endless than those hours of wind and waves. You'd give anything for that kind of chaos now. At least it was honest in its intentions. This quiet rot is worse. It creeps, patient and unstoppable. A sailor crouches near you, retying a sandal whose sole has split. He glances up, meeting your eye, and offers a wan half-smile. You cant some and one back. You simply nod and look away. Time drips past. The sun crawls higher. The smell thickens until you're sure it's settled into your hair, your skin, every fiber of your tunic. You tilt your head back and try to breathe through your mouth. The wind shifts, delivering a fresh note of decay, and you close your eyes against the nausea dot somewhere near the bow. A gull lets out a high, sharp cry. You open your eyes and watch it disappear into the bright, empty sky. You envy its clean feathers, its freedom to fly anywhere. You exhale, feeling the air scrape the back of your throat. You are still here. You are still thirsty, and there is nothing else to do but endure. You've stopped trying to measure time by the sun or the waves. Now, you count it in smaller increments. How long it takes for your tongue to feel like cracked leather. How often the mule heaves a rattling sigh. How many heartbeats pass between each fresh wave of nausea when the wind shifts. You can't remember what it was like to wake up without a sour taste in your mouth. You hold yourself upright, swaying a little. The deck under your bare feet feels alive. Flexing with each lazy swell, you glance around, and for a moment you almost believe the crew has vanished. No voices, no footsteps. Then you spot them, clustered near the forehatch, heads bent close. The hush is worse than shouting. You drift closer, because you can't help yourself. You stop just far enough away to watch without intruding. One man holds a clay lamp low, casting tremulous light over an open barrel. You catch a glimpse of the contents, grey sludge clinging to the sides, lumpy and glistening. Another water cask gone. The sailor with the lamp rubs a hand over his face, leaving a smear of grime across his cheek. No one speaks. There's nothing left to say. Historians still argue whether Roman captains rationed stores by careful calculation or simply by necessity and desperation. Standing here, watching them tally what little remains, you suspect desperation has the upper hand. Remember the first time you saw an amphora split open? How you thought it was just bad luck. You were so hopeful. You didn't realize decayers, the only reliable passenger on this voyage. You turn away, heart thumping dully. You walk back to your mat, feeling the eyes of the gulls following you. One lands near the spilled water, dipping its beak to taste. It flutters back immediately, as if even a scavenger has its limits. You sit down, folding your legs, and close your eyes. A wave rocks the hull, and for an instant, you imagine the ship simply rolling over, sparing you the slow, humiliating march towardwards. But the moment passes, the ship rights itself. Groaning in protest, you are still here. A sailor pauses, with a bucket, sets it beside you without comment. You open your eyes and look inside. The water is cloudy, a skin of film swirling on the surface. You know you'll drink it anyway. You pick up the ladle, lift it to your mouth, and swallow. The taste is as bad as ever. When you set the ladle down, you rest your cheek against your knee. The sun has climbed higher again, flattening every shadow. The mule shifts, its tether creaking. You look at its dull eyes, wondering whether it ever dreams of fields and grass. You wonder if it resents you for surviving beside it. Probably. A voice cracks the silence, low and hoarse. You glance over your shoulder to see the captain issuing orders in a tone that is more weary than angry. The men move to adjust the rigging. One limps. Another's tunic is patched so many times it's mostly stitches. You watch them work, feeling something close to kinship in your shared attrition. Remember when you were sure the storm was the worst this ship could throw at you? You didn't know the real danger was the way the small miseries pile up spoiled food, stale water, the slow unspooling of morale until no one has the energy to curse anymore. You lean back against a crate, feeling the boards warm your spine. The heat is oppressive, a slow baking that dries your lips and puckers your skin. You close your eyes again and drift for a few heartbeats in a daze that isn't quite sleep. The creak of the hull, the slap of water, the low murmur of exhausted men, these are your lullabies now. You startle when a gull screeches overhead. Your heart kicks against your ribs. You open your eyes to see it land near the mule, cocking its head as if hoping the beast will expire and provide an easy meal. You almost admire its efficiency. You rub your temples. You are tired in a way that feels carved into your bones. You glance over the railing, watching the waves go around the hull, and wonder how many days it's been since you boarded. You don't bother trying to count. You know it would only make you feel worse. You draw your knees to your chest and let your chin rest on them. The sun beats down. The ship creaks. You are still here. And there is still no land in sight. By now, You no longer expect relief from anything, least of all from dawn. But it comes anyway. Pale and insistent, crawling across the deck and prying. Open your swollen eyelids. You lift your head from your knees, your neck crackling like brittle parchment. The mule is already awake, sides moving with a slow, labored rhythm. You wonder if it ever truly sleeps. You push yourself upright, every motion careful. Your tunic clings damply to your skin, crusted with salt and the invisible residue of too many days in the same clothes. You can't remember what clean feels like. You're not sure you'd recognize it if you felt it again. The crew is gathered, near the bow, huddled tight as if proximity alone might ward off the creeping despair. You drift closer, because you stopped pretending there's any privacy here. As you near, you catch fragments of conversation, words like port and provisions, and barely enough. No one raises their voice. No one bothers to look optimistic. Sailor breaks from the group, carrying a small ledger. He moves slowly, as if the act of recording these losses has physically weighed him down. He stops near you and sighs, flipping the thin wax tablet closed. You meet his gaze, and for a moment, the two of you share the same thought. You will not forget this voyage. No matter how hard you might try, he moves on. You step to the rail, resting your raw palms against it. The wind has shifted again, teasing you with a cooler draft that does nothing to cleanse the stench. You close your eyes and inhale, anyway, just to remember the sensation of air that isn't stale and sour. When you open your eyes, you see something you almost don't trust, a thin, dark line smudged across the horizon. You blink, then squint. The line doesn't vanish. It stays, solid and stubborn. For the first time in what feels like years, your pulse flutters with something you hesitate to name. Hope is dangerous here, where every promise has so far turned to disappointment. But the line stays, even as the ship creaks beneath you, even as the gulls drift overhead in their indifferent circles. Remember when you thought you'd never see land again. You can almost hear your own voice mocking you for doubting. But you don't care. You'd trade every last scrap of pride for the chance to set foot on solid ground. You turn to find the captain standing a few paces away. He's watching the same smudge on the horizon, his face unreadable. When he finally speaks, his voice is hoarse and low. If the wind holds, we'll be there by dusk. He doesn't wait for a reply. He just moves off, calling for the men to tighten the rigging and prepare for the approach. Meanwhile, your phone is dead, but so is any thought you might have had about giving up. You watch as the crew stirs, their motions a little faster, a little less resigned. The news passes along. The deck murmurs, and you feel something easing in your chest that you didn't realize was clenched tight. You lean against the railing and close your eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun without resenting it for the first time in days. The mule huffs behind you, lifting its head, though it, too, senses the change. You almost smile, almost remember the storm, the spoiled grain, the endless thirst. You know they will stay with you, but suddenly they seem smaller, more survivable. You survive them. That thought alone feels like a victory worth savoring. You open your eyes again and watch the line of land grow sharper, darker. Each wave that rocks the ship feels like a step closer to escape. You breathe in, and for the first time, the air tastes almost clean. You are still here, and for once, that doesn't feel like a defeat. Tonight you've traveled far further than you might have believed possible when you first climbed aboard this creaking Roman cargo ship. You've enjoyed the damp mat that never dried, the grain that spoiled in its barrels, and the sour water you drank because you had no other choice. You have felt the deck shudder under storms and swelter under an unpitying sun. You have woken to the mule's tired breathing and the quiet dread of knowing each day was just a little worse than the last. But now, as you drift closer to sleep, you can feel the ship easing its hold on you. The creak of the hull softens, the stale wind calms. You've earned this moment of rest, this gentle unspooling of tension in your shoulders and spine. Each breath can be slow now, deeper and hurried. Let your thoughts soften round the memory of this long voyage, the rough ropes, the cracked barrels, the small quiet victories of simply standing up each morning. Those things are behind you. Your story can rest now, safe in the knowledge that the horizon always comes, no matter how endless the sea may feel. And as you slip further into that warm, slow darkness, remember how lucky you are to live in a world with clean water, solid ground, and a bed that doesn't rock beneath you. The hardships of ancient ships are only memories here, drifting away as your breathing grows slow. Your body can soften. Your mind can quiet. You are safe. You are home. And you have survived.